the New York Times writer Nikole Hannah-Jones, the kind of lead architect of the 1619 Project, has been offered a contract, a 5-year contract to teach at the Hussman School of Journalism at the University of North Carolina. But initially they had considered offering her a tenured position, which they decided not to do. And Nikole Hannah-Jones is now not only suing, but she's mobilizing all kinds of leftist opposition in the school. The typical kind of, let's intimidate them into giving me a tenured position. And so sure enough, some black faculty and staff are like, UNC, we're going to resign. We're going to move to other colleges because of the racially intolerant atmosphere. This is how the left works, guys. Student body president Lamar Richards is discouraging potential students of color from coming to UNC because they won't give tenure to Nikole Hannah-Jones. So no one knows whether UNC is going to cave on this. I hope they don't. Now, who's Nikole Hannah-Jones? Well, first of all, she's not a historian. She's not a professor. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative writer. She's won a couple of awards, the MacArthur Genius Grant, which no longer is given to anybody who could recognizably call it a genius, a Peabody Award, and a George Polk Award. But the bottom line of it is that this is a woman who traffics, by and large, in ignorance and lies. So, ignorance. You might remember that going back late last year, I had shown some genealogy charts pointing out that Kamala Harris was descended from a slave ancestor, Hamilton Brown, one of the largest slave owners in Jamaica. So Nikole Hannah-Jones, joined by actually by a historian named Kevin Levin, they were like, "Oh, Dinesh, you're such a fool. Don't you realize that the reason for this kind of connection is because of rape on the plantation?" So they jumped to the assumption, based upon their own kind of, I'd call it fragmentary historical knowledge, that yeah, there was rape on the plantation, therefore that's obviously where Kamala Harris's lineage came from. Except it's not true. All you have to do is look at the genealogical charts, look at the testimony of Kamala Harris's own dad, who was, by the way, an economics professor at Stanford, where he points out that his grandmother, a free woman of color, married into this slave owner family, and in that sense became part of that lineage. So no, rape on the plantation had nothing to do with it. But here's the key point. Nikole Hannah-Jones slyly deletes her tweet. She doesn't make any mention of it, no apology, no, Dinesh was right. Now, the other guy, Kevin Levin, to his credit, at least goes, you know what, I kind of wronged Dinesh. I jumped to conclusions, and so I acknowledge my mistake. A kind of a rare moment of honesty from a progressive historian, but not from Nikole Hannah-Jones. Now, one of the central claims of the 1619 Project, and I alluded to this in the last segment, is the idea that America is stained from the beginning with the sin of oppression, and particularly with the sin of slavery. One of the central claims of the 1619 Project is basically, I'm going to quote it, "One of the primary reasons the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery." The American founding itself, 1776, was an attempt to protect slavery. Now, let's think about this for a moment. In order to prove a claim like this, you'd have to show kind of two things. One is that the British wanted to end slavery in America, but the Americans wanted to keep it. And so the colonists go, "No, we're not going to let you end slavery. We're going to fight to keep this institution that gives us access to free labor." Now, none of this even happens, nor does Nikole Hannah-Jones bother to offer any proof of it. She does point out that, in the early 19th century, the British had an anti-slavery movement which ended slavery. There were not very many slaves in Britain, but there was an international slave trade, and Britain played a role in ending that. But the key point is, that's not what the American Revolution was about at all. All you have to do is look at the stated causes of the Revolution, which was basically the American founders thought they were being enslaved by the British. In fact, they thought that things like the Stamp Act and the Declaratory Act. So here's the Declaratory Act. Here's what it says. It basically says that the British Crown and the Parliament have, quote, "the right to bind the colonies and people of America subjects of the Crown of Great Britain in all cases whatsoever." So basically, you're our slaves. And the American founders fought against that form of what they perceived to be servitude. Now, let's turn to the issue of slavery. And here's a remarkable statement by Thomas Jefferson. This is from his This is from Jefferson's Summary View of the Rights of British America, published 1774, shortly before the Declaration of Independence, a very influential document in American history. And here's Jefferson. The abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. Think about this for a moment. Here's Jefferson, a Virginian, a planter, and a slave owner, saying, we, the colonies, have long wanted to get rid of slavery. But you, the British, have introduced slavery in America and sustained the institution here. So this is Jefferson's point of view. By the way, Abraham Lincoln took note of this remark by Jefferson. It was very important to Lincoln's own understanding of the founding. And I'm continuing now with Jefferson. He says, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. And then talking about slavery, the Almighty has no attribute, no feature, which can take side with us in such a contest. So the point to make is that even the Southerners in America at the time of the founding had strong anti-slavery sentiments. By the way, this was also true of Washington. It was also true of Madison. There were about 100 anti-slavery societies in the South around the time of the American founding. The point is that the kind of positive good defense of slavery came later, came in the 19th century, came with the Democratic Party. This fact is seriously downplayed, if mentioned at all, in the 1619 Project. Why? Because basically the 1619 Project is an effort to lift the blame off the Democratic Party and push it onto the American founders. So America then bears the stain or the scarlet letter for what the Democratic Party actually did. So bottom line of it is the 1619 Project is not history. It's not even an attempt to debate history. And you notice that no one really, apart from a few quarters like this podcast, no one's really debating it. It is used as an ideological truncheon to beat students in school, to try to exploit the ignorance of young people who maybe don't know better, haven't read the original documents, don't know very much about Jefferson's summary view of the rights of British America. Why? Because it's often not assigned. So what we're talking about here is not UNC denying a position to a trusted, reliable, balanced, fair-minded scholar, but rather what you have is a maniacal ideologue, an apostle not of tolerance but of intolerance. And in denying her tenure, UNC is at least protecting their own students and their freedom of inquiry and their ability to learn.